Hi, welcome back to This Week in Football, and today I'm going to be talking about Newcastle and the recent news that they will not be signing Rafa Benitez on a contract extension. Obviously, this is one of the worst decisions that Newcastle could have made. It shows once again why Mike Ashley is one of the worst managers in the league. He's definitely up there with Stan Kroenke, as with Arsenal. It just shows when he signed on to become Newcastle owner, he didn't know and didn't understand how much investment it would take. But going into the summer, everyone located two signings that Newcastle had to make. The first being Rondon, which so far they failed to lock up. You could see at the end of the season, the link-up play that he had with Jose Perez was some of the best in the league, and him reaching double figures in goals was a terrific achievement by a side that finished 13th. And now the second signing, the more important one, was Rafa Benitez. After 3 years at the club, in which he was relegated, brought them back up, finished mid-table, 10th place his first season back in the Prem, and then 13th place this year. It shows that he wanted to stay on, because he could have left when they got relegated. He could have left when he didn't receive the financial support last year. He stayed on at the hope of getting the money that he needed to take Newcastle to the place that he can see them. But now that Rafa Benitez hasn't been signed, it's not looking bright from Newcastle. And I think most people are saying two paths from where they can go. The first is where they stay where they are. With the limited fund, the limited financial support, they would just get backed up by a mediocre manager. Now, mediocre, I mean not on the level of Rafa Benitez. The fact that Rafa Benitez was even at Newcastle to begin with is just crazy to think about. To think that 2 years ago, Rafa Benitez was a championship manager. The managers I can see, David Moyes, Alan Pardew, those level managers, where they're established Premier League managers, but they're not the best. They're not going to take Newcastle anywhere. They're just going to secure safety or relegation. And then we look at the players. First off, Sean Longstaff. The young player showed a lot of promise until his injury this season. He's already being linked with Manchester United. Without Rafa Benitez, why stay at Newcastle? Even Manchester United, the shambles that they're in as a club right now, Newcastle is in a worse position, in addition to a higher wage. So why would he stay in Newcastle? There's no reason to. And then we look at Almiron and Perez, the bright attacking players in the Newcastle side. Almiron signed, of course, $24 million in the winter. Everyone thought that was signed until Mike Ashley might be supporting the team. He might be trying to keep Rafa Benitez on, but that was all false hope. Why would Almiron and Perez stay? They don't really fit into the Newcastle team that will be developed without the investment and just go back to the rugged team, poor defense. It's just going to be how long until Rafa Benitez tactics are cleaned out of that team. Because of that, I see 2 to 3 seasons left in the Prem, if nothing else changes. However, the second path is the financial takeover. The first bid is an Arab bid from the Bin Zayed group, and this is some of the relatives to the owners of the Manchester City team. And then the second group is a group of investors from France. So, of course, this would result with a huge influx of money. And the question is how they would handle this new support, this new money. You can have all the money in the world, but that's not going to guarantee success, as PSG has proven. You might argue, they won the league, and that's not a hard thing to do. They haven't achieved anything in Europe. They haven't had any success in the Champions League, so it's smart spending, and then it's also dodging financial fair play. However, with Manchester City not receiving any repercussions for how much money they've spent, and Real Madrid only spending $300 million, it doesn't seem like that hard of a thing to do. And then we look at the managers. What managers can Newcastle attract with all of this money? The first thing that I'll bring up, I don't think it'll happen, but it's just something that needs to be talked about, is if Rafa Benitez were to return to Newcastle. This isn't very likely, but it's probably the best case scenario, because he's worked with Newcastle 3 years, of course. He obviously loves the club, or else he wouldn't have stayed after the relegation in his first season. And his tactics are already in the club, so he can just build off of that. He doesn't have to create a new basis for him to develop his tactics and ideas for the club. However, much like a remake of Season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones, it's not going to happen. And then we look at Jose Mourinho. At first, this might sound weird because he's one of the top of all managers. He's Chelsea, Real Madrid, and most recently with Manchester United. But he's expressed that he wants more of a challenge and more of a project team. You look back at his first success with FC Porto, a small team with no real expectations outside of their domestic league, and then winning the Champions League. That's how he made his name. Last year, finishing second with Manchester United. That was a great achievement. You look at Manchester United and what a spot they're in, how bad their club is right now. For him to finish second behind Manchester City, one of the best Premier League teams that we've ever seen, and yet he was sacked half a season later. So he obviously wants more security and more support. Because if he were to go to Newcastle and even finish in the top half of the table, that's the next 2-3 years secured. And I could really see the Newcastle fans getting behind him because he's got a strong character, strong personality. You can see those in the press conferences, and they would definitely back him. And then some of the other managers that I've seen thrown out there, the Ajax manager, Erik ten Hag, I don't really see this happening. He's been at Ajax since 2017. He's been able to build up the success that they saw this season in the Champions League, making the semifinal and almost to the final if it weren't for Lucas Moura. And then some of the other managers that are out of jobs. Santiago Solari, Maximiliano Allegri, of course, just replaced by Antonio Conte, and then Gattuso, who was released from AC Milan. These are some big managers that definitely would be tempted by a Newcastle that's backed by all of this financial money. And then, of course, the most important thing is what players Newcastle could sign. To start, of course, as it is with all clubs that get the new money, it would have to be high transfer fees and high wages, because you're coming to a team that's a project. You're not coming to a team that's really going to win titles right away. So the top players aren't going to want to go to Newcastle. It's going to be the mid to top tier that are going to want the higher wages to be tempted there. And then, of course, Newcastle isn't a Barcelona. It isn't a Madrid. So the wages are going to be higher to bring those bigger players in. That was always the thing with Barcelona. It's easier to bring a player. Felipe Coutinho, a Brazilian player, going from Liverpool to Barcelona, that's a pretty easy decision. Taking out all of the soccer and all of the play, just the locations. But what could happen? So projection, 2 to 3 years. I don't really see any real success or improvement. They would have all that money, but it takes a while for that money to seep into the infrastructure of the team. However, within 5 years, I'd see probably become an established mid to top table side, finishing around that 10th and higher spot consistently. But within 10 years, definitely competing for the Europa League and the European competitions. And then from there, I don't think you can really make any projections because it depends on the level of investment of the other teams in the league. Because if everyone's investing the same as Newcastle, the market rises and then this financial takeover won't really affect anything. All in all, everything is looking dim for Newcastle at the moment. The big takeover that everyone's looking for is an if, and that's a big if. And there's only one thing that's sure right now. And that's that letting go Rafa Benitez was a horrible decision, and it's going to hurt Newcastle for the next few years, even if they get their financial takeover. And it's just going to be interesting to see the way that Newcastle react to Rafa's departure over the next few seasons. Whether they get that takeover, how they use that money, how they develop, and if they don't, what manager comes in and how they're able to take this struggling Newcastle team. Are they going to be able to improve it, or will we see them as a championship team or even a Sunderland? But as always, thank you for tuning in to This Week in Football. Make sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, this has been This Week in Football. Thank you.